Arsenal escalation, military-grade cartel capabilities. This purchasing power translates directly into arsenals that exceed the firepower available to many national armies, with weapons inventories that include anti-aircraft guns, bazookas, rocket-propelled grenades, and anti-personnel landmines. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel maintains armored vehicle fleets that rival those of conventional military forces, including modified pickup trucks with steel plating and firing ports, purpose-built armored personnel carriers, and even tanks acquired through black market networks. The Sinaloa cartel operates helicopter fleets for transportation and combat operations, with aircraft modified to carry heavy weapons and conduct aerial reconnaissance missions. These weapons systems represent a qualitative and quantitative upgrade from the handguns and assault rifles that characterize cartel arsenals in previous decades. Criminal organizations acquire military-grade equipment through sophisticated supply chains that exploit weaknesses in international arms control systems and domestic corruption networks. International export brokers work with criminal organizations to facilitate weapons purchases through legitimate commercial channels, using shell companies and falsified documentation to obscure the final destination of military equipment. Transshipment companies and freight forwarders provide logistical support that enables weapons to transit through multiple countries before reaching criminal organizations in Mexico. The same networks that facilitate precursor chemical smuggling for synthetic drug production also handle weapons trafficking, creating integrated supply chains that serve multiple criminal purposes. Corrupt military and police officials play crucial roles in weapons trafficking by providing access to government arsenals and facilitating illegal sales of military equipment. These officials sell weapons directly from government stockpiles or arrange for weapons to be reported as lost or stolen when they are actually transferred to criminal organizations. The corruption extends beyond simple weapons sales to include intelligence sharing about government operations, training in weapon systems, and ongoing technical support for maintaining sophisticated equipment. Former military personnel who join criminal organizations often maintain contact with active duty colleagues who continue to provide weapons and equipment on an ongoing basis. Armored vehicles operated by criminal organizations include factory-manufactured military equipment and custom-modified civilian vehicles that provide protection equivalent to military standards. The CJNG operates armored personnel carriers that can transport up to 12 armed personnel while providing protection against small arms fire and explosive devices. These vehicles feature gun ports that allow occupants to engage targets while remaining protected, communication systems that enable coordination with other units, and armor plating that can withstand direct hits from military-grade weapons. Custom modifications include reinforced suspension systems that handle additional weight, upgraded engines that maintain mobility despite armor additions, and specialized tires that resist puncture from battlefield debris. Aircraft capabilities include helicopters modified for combat operations and small fixed-wing aircraft used for reconnaissance and transportation missions. Criminal organizations operate helicopter fleets that provide tactical mobility in mountainous terrain where ground vehicles cannot operate effectively. These aircraft feature armor plating around critical components, mounted weapons systems including machine guns and rocket launchers, and electronic warfare equipment that can jam government communications. Fixed-wing aircraft operated by criminal organizations include cargo planes capable of transporting multi-ton drug shipments and smaller reconnaissance aircraft equipped with surveillance equipment that rivals government intelligence capabilities. Criminal organizations recruit former military personnel through financial incentives that exceed military salaries by factors of 10 or more, providing immediate cash payments, ongoing salaries, and performance bonuses that make legitimate employment economically unviable. These recruitment efforts target personnel with specialized skills including explosives expertise, communications technology, tactical planning, and weapons maintenance capabilities. Former military personnel provide training in advanced combat techniques, weapons handling, and tactical coordination that transforms criminal organizations from simple armed groups into professional paramilitary units capable of conducting complex operations. The evolution from simple gunmen to professional paramilitary units has created criminal organizations that operate with military discipline and tactical sophistication. These units maintain command, structures that mirror military organizations with clear chains of command, specialized roles, and professional standards that ensure operational effectiveness. Training programs conducted by former military personnel include marksmanship instruction, tactical movement, explosive device construction, and communications procedures that enable criminal organizations to conduct operations with precision and coordination that rivals government forces. Cartel firepower now compares favorably to that of Mexican security forces, with some criminal organizations possessing superior equipment and training compared to government units. The weapons available to major criminal organizations exceed those carried by typical police units and match the capabilities of military forces deployed in counterinsurgency operations. The numerical strength of criminal organizations in certain regions exceeds that of government forces, creating situations where criminal groups can achieve tactical superiority through superior numbers and equivalent equipment. This arms escalation has fundamentally changed the nature of cartel-state confrontations from law enforcement operations to military campaigns that resemble conventional warfare between competing armies. Government forces now face opponents with equivalent weapons, superior numbers, and advantages in terrain knowledge and local support that create tactical situations where criminal organizations can achieve battlefield victories against government forces. The transformation of criminal organizations into professional military forces has created a security challenge that exceeds the capabilities of traditional law enforcement approaches and requires responses that acknowledge the conventional warfare nature of contemporary cartel-state confrontations. Government strategies, successes, and failures. Mexican government responses to these military-grade threats have evolved through multiple strategic approaches, each producing mixed results that highlight the complexity of confronting quasi-sovereign criminal organizations. President Claudia Sheinbaum's security strategy, announced during her inauguration on October 1, 2024, represents a significant departure from the previous administration's approach to combating organized crime. The new plan involves increased deployments of security forces, expanded intelligence operations, and a return to high-profile arrests targeting criminal leadership. These measures respond partially to renewed pressure from the Trump administration to curb drug trafficking and migration, with some U.S. politicians considering unilateral military strikes against Mexican criminal organizations. The early implementation of this strategy suggests a potential readoption of the kingpin strategy employed by President Felipe Calderon, which focused on eliminating the leaders of criminal groups rather than dismantling their organizational structures. The measurable outcomes of previous approaches remain subjects of intense debate among security analysts and policy experts. Violent statistics show contradictory results, with some regions experiencing reduced homicide rates while others saw increases in criminal activity during periods of reduced government pressure. The emphasis on addressing root causes of crime through social programs produced limited measurable impact on criminal recruitment patterns, particularly in regions where criminal organizations maintained strong territorial control. Economic indicators from areas where policies were most extensively implemented show marginal improvements in poverty reduction and employment creation, but these gains fail to translate into significant reductions in criminal organization membership or territorial influence. Military operations conducted under the current administration have achieved mixed success rates in disrupting cartel activities. Operation Enduring Safety, launched in early 2025 across multiple states, resulted in the arrest of 847 suspected criminals and the seizure of significant quantities of drugs and weapons. However, intelligence assessments indicate that these operations disrupted criminal activities for periods ranging from several weeks to several months before criminal organizations adapted their procedures and resumed operations. The success rate for permanently dismantling criminal cells remains below 15%, with most disrupted operations reconstituting within 6 months using alternative personnel and modified operational procedures. The effectiveness of targeting cartel leadership versus dismantling organizational structures has produced conflicting results that highlight the complexity of modern criminal organizations. Leadership decapitation operations have succeeded in eliminating high-value targets, but have failed to produce lasting organizational disruption. The removal of senior criminal figures often triggers succession struggles that increase violence while enabling rival organizations to exploit the resulting instability. The arrest of Ismael El Mayo Zambada in July 2024 triggered a succession war within the Sinaloa cartel that increased violence levels across multiple states and created opportunities for rival organizations to expand their territorial control. Similar patterns followed the arrests of other senior criminal figures, with violence typically increasing for periods of 6 to 12 months following major leadership arrests. The National Guard's performance in cartel-controlled territories has varied significantly depending on local conditions and the specific criminal organizations they confront. In some regions, National Guard units have successfully established government presence and reduced criminal activity through sustained operations that combine military tactics with community engagement. However, in other areas, National Guard forces have struggled to maintain territorial control against criminal organizations that possess superior numbers, local knowledge, and community support. The National Guard's effectiveness appears to correlate with the level of local government support and the strength of criminal organizations in specific territories. Coordination challenges between federal, state, and local security forces continue to hamper anti-cartel operations despite repeated efforts to improve interagency cooperation. Information sharing between agencies remains inconsistent, with each level of government maintaining separate intelligence systems that operate with limited integration. Operational coordination suffers from jurisdictional disputes, competing priorities, and resource constraints that prevent unified approaches to complex criminal threats. The lack of standardized procedures for multi-agency operations creates situations where federal, state, and local forces operate with conflicting objectives and incompatible methods. Corruption continues to undermine government anti-cartel operations through infiltration of security agencies and compromise of operational security. Criminal organizations maintain extensive networks of informants within government agencies that provide advance warning of planned operations and intelligence about government capabilities and intentions. The corruption extends beyond simple bribery to include family relationships, romantic involvement, and long-term personal relationships that create loyalty conflicts among security personnel. The impact of corruption on operations includes compromised intelligence, failed operations, and the systematic undermining of government efforts to establish territorial control. Traditional law enforcement methods have proven insufficient against modern cartel organizations because these criminal groups operate as quasi-governmental entities rather than simple criminal enterprises. The police investigative techniques designed for discrete criminal acts cannot effectively address organizations that control territory, provide services, and maintain administrative structures. The legal framework designed for prosecuting individual criminals lacks the scope necessary to address criminal organizations that function as competing governmental authorities. The transformation of criminal organizations into territorial powers requires governmental responses that acknowledge their quasi-sovereign nature, but this recognition has been slow to translate into effective operational capabilities that match the sophisticated systems these organizations now employ. Technology and intelligence, the modern cartel advantage. These sophisticated systems have enabled criminal organizations to transform themselves into technologically advanced enterprises that rival legitimate corporations in their adoption of cutting-edge digital capabilities. The Sinaloa cartel operates encrypted communication networks that span multiple countries, using satellite technology and fiber optic connections to maintain real-time coordination between operational cells. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel employs artificial intelligence systems for logistics optimization and predictive analytics that help them anticipate government operations and market fluctuations. These technological capabilities represent investments of hundreds of millions of dollars in equipment and personnel, creating criminal organizations that operate with digital sophistication that exceeds many government agencies. Drone technology has become central to cartel operations, with criminal organizations deploying unmanned aerial vehicles for surveillance, transportation, and combat missions that provide tactical advantages over both government forces and rival organizations. The CJNG operates drone fleets that include commercial quadcopters modified for surveillance operations, larger fixed-wing drones capable of carrying multi-kilogram payloads, and weaponized drones equipped with explosive devices for targeted attacks. These aircraft conduct reconnaissance missions that provide real-time intelligence on government troop movements, rival cartel positions, and potential threats to operational security. Combat drones feature explosive payloads that can be detonated remotely against specific targets, creating asymmetric warfare capabilities that compensate for numerical disadvantages against government forces. Smuggling operations using drones have revolutionized drug trafficking by enabling criminal organizations to transport contraband across heavily monitored borders without risking personnel or traditional transportation assets. These operations use specially modified drones capable of carrying payloads exceeding 25 kilograms across distances of over 100 kilometers, delivering drugs directly to distribution networks without crossing official border checkpoints. The precision of drone delivery systems allows criminal organizations to coordinate with receiving teams using GPS coordinates and encrypted communications that minimize the risk of interdiction. Communication networks operated by criminal organizations utilize military-grade encryption technology and redundant systems that provide operational security superior to many government agencies. These networks integrate satellite communications, encrypted radio systems, and internet-based messaging platforms that enable coordination across vast geographic areas while protecting against electronic surveillance. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel maintains communication centers that monitor government radio frequencies, intercept cellular communications, and coordinate counter-surveillance operations that protect criminal activities from detection. The sophistication of these communication systems enables criminal organizations to respond rapidly to threats while maintaining operational coordination that rivals professional military organizations. Social media platforms serve as intelligence gathering tools that criminal organizations use to monitor government activities, track rival organizations, and coordinate recruitment operations. Criminal groups maintain sophisticated social media monitoring systems that analyze public posts, government announcements, and news reports to identify potential threats and opportunities. These systems use automated analysis tools that can process thousands of social media posts daily, identifying patterns and trends that inform operational planning and strategic decision-making. Cryptocurrency has become integral to cartel financial operations, enabling money laundering and international transactions that avoid traditional banking systems and government oversight. Criminal organizations use cryptocurrency exchanges to convert drug proceeds into digital assets that can be transferred internationally without detection, creating financial networks that operate independently of regulated banking systems. The anonymity provided by cryptocurrency transactions enables criminal organizations to conduct business with international partners while protecting their financial assets from government seizure. Intelligence gathering capabilities operated by criminal organizations include electronic surveillance systems, human intelligence networks, and cyber infiltration operations that provide comprehensive coverage of government activities and rival organization operations. The Sinaloa cartel maintains intelligence units that monitor government communications, track the movements of security officials, and gather information about planned operations through electronic surveillance and human sources. These intelligence capabilities enable criminal organizations to anticipate government actions, identify security vulnerabilities, and coordinate defensive measures that protect their operations from disruption. Cyber warfare tactics employed by criminal organizations include digital infiltration of government systems, electronic warfare against rival organizations, and cyber attacks designed to disrupt government operations and communications. Criminal groups have developed capabilities for hacking government databases, intercepting electronic communications, and conducting denial-of-service attacks against government websites and communication systems. These cyber operations provide criminal organizations with intelligence advantages while creating operational disruptions that hinder government effectiveness. Commercial technology exploitation involves criminal organizations using legitimate business systems and consumer technology for criminal purposes, creating hybrid networks that blend legal and illegal activities. Criminal groups use commercial shipping systems to transport contraband, legitimate financial services to launder money, and consumer electronics to coordinate operations and gather intelligence. The integration of commercial technology into criminal operations makes it extremely difficult for authorities to distinguish between legitimate and criminal activities. The technological sophistication of modern criminal organizations requires government responses that acknowledge their corporate-level capabilities rather than treating them as enhanced street gangs. This technological arms race has created criminal enterprises that operate with global reach and capabilities that extend far beyond Mexico's borders. International expansion, cartels as global players. These capabilities enable Mexican criminal organizations to establish operational presence across 6 continents, transforming from regional trafficking groups into global criminal enterprises that rival multinational corporations in their international reach. The Sinaloa cartel maintains active operations in over 40 countries, with permanent cells established in major cities including Sydney, Madrid, Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Bangkok. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel operates in similar numbers of countries, focusing particularly on European markets where cocaine commands premium prices and synthetic drugs face less competition from established suppliers. These organizations have moved beyond simple drug trafficking to establish comprehensive criminal enterprises that include money laundering, arms trafficking, and human smuggling operations that span multiple jurisdictions. European operations represent the most lucrative expansion for Mexican cartels, with the continent offering markets where cocaine sells for 3 times the price commanded in North America markets. The Sinaloa cartel has established distribution networks in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain that serve as entry points for drugs destined for markets throughout the European Union. These networks operate through partnerships with local criminal organizations, including the Ndrangheta in Italy, Albanian criminal groups in the Balkans, and Dutch trafficking organizations that control Rotterdam and Amsterdam ports. The European operations generate an estimated $8 billion annually for Mexican cartels, representing approximately 20% of their total global revenue. Partnership structures with international criminal organizations have evolved beyond simple buyer-seller relationships toward complex joint ventures that share resources, territory, and operational capabilities. The CJNG maintains strategic alliances with Colombian cartels that provide cocaine supplies, Chinese criminal organizations that supply precursor chemicals, and European criminal groups that handle distribution and money laundering operations. These partnerships operate through formal agreements that establish territorial boundaries, profit-sharing arrangements, and dispute resolution mechanisms that prevent conflicts from disrupting profitable operations. The international partnerships enable Mexican cartels to access global markets while leveraging local expertise and established criminal networks. Operational cells established in foreign countries function as autonomous units that maintain communication with Mexican headquarters while adapting to local conditions and legal environments. These cells typically consist of 15 to 30 operatives who establish legitimate business fronts, develop corruption networks among local officials, and create distribution systems that serve specific regional markets. The cells operate restaurants, import-export businesses, and real estate companies that provide cover for criminal activities while generating legitimate revenue that supports operational expenses. The cellular structure provides operational security by isolating foreign operations from Mexican activities while enabling rapid expansion into new territories. International drug trafficking networks operated by Mexican cartels utilize sophisticated logistics systems that coordinate shipments across multiple continents using commercial transportation infrastructure. These networks employ container shipping companies, air cargo services, and commercial trucking operations to move multi-ton quantities of drugs between production areas and destination markets. The logistics operations require coordination between dozens of companies and hundreds of personnel who handle different aspects of the trafficking process from initial shipment to final delivery. The complexity of these networks creates redundancy that enables operations to continue even when specific routes or personnel are compromised by law enforcement operations. Mexican cartels adapt their operational methods to different legal and security environments by studying local law enforcement capabilities, corruption vulnerabilities, and judicial systems that affect their criminal activities. In countries with strong rule of law and effective law enforcement, cartel operations emphasize stealth and corruption over violence and intimidation. In countries with weak governance and limited law enforcement capabilities, cartel operations utilize violence and territorial control methods similar to those employed in Mexico. The adaptability demonstrates the organizational sophistication that enables Mexican cartels to operate effectively across diverse political and legal environments. Violence and intimidation operations conducted by Mexican cartels on foreign soil have created diplomatic tensions and security concerns that affect bilateral relationships between Mexico and other countries. The assassination of rivals in European cities, kidnappings of family members in South American countries, and armed confrontations in Central American territories have prompted foreign governments to increase security cooperation with Mexican authorities. These violent operations often involve the same tactics employed in Mexico, including torture, beheadings, and public displays of bodies that serve as warnings to rivals and local populations. The Sinaloa cartel's expansion into Australian markets illustrates how Mexican organizations establish operations in distant territories with different cultural and legal environments. Australian operations focus on methamphetamine distribution through networks that exploit the country's geographic isolation and limited law enforcement resources dedicated to international drug trafficking. The cartel has established manufacturing facilities in remote areas of Australia using Mexican personnel who provide technical expertise while recruiting local operatives who understand Australian criminal networks and law enforcement procedures. These operations generate profits that exceed $500 million annually for the Sinaloa cartel. Foreign government responses to Mexican cartel presence vary significantly based on domestic political considerations, law enforcement capabilities, and diplomatic relationships with Mexico. European governments have increased intelligence sharing and joint operations with Mexican authorities while implementing financial sanctions that target cartel money laundering operations. Asian governments have focused on controlling precursor chemical exports and disrupting cartel supply chains that depend on Chinese manufacturers. Mexican cartels have evolved from regional criminal groups into global criminal enterprises that challenge traditional concepts of sovereignty and international law enforcement. These organizations now operate with international reach that exceeds many legitimate multinational corporations while maintaining operational capabilities that rival those of nation-states. The global expansion creates security challenges that extend far beyond Mexico's borders, but the most devastating consequences of this transformation continue to unfold within Mexico itself, where the human toll of the human cost, violence statistics, and social impact. The casualty figures for 2025 paint a devastating picture of Mexico's ongoing security crisis, with preliminary data indicating over 32,400 homicides recorded through the first 11 months of the year. This represents a 3.2% increase from the previous year's totals, reversing a brief decline that had offered hope for improvement. The homicide rate now stands at 25.8 per 100,000 residents, maintaining Mexico's position among the most violent countries globally. These statistics exclude the thousands of disappearances that occur annually, with over 118,000 people now classified as missing since comprehensive record-keeping began in 2006. The true scale of violence extends far beyond these official figures, as many deaths go unreported in regions where criminal organizations maintain territorial control. Regional variations in homicide rates reveal the geographic concentration of violence across Mexico's diverse territories. The states of Colima, Baja California, and Chihuahua continue to record the highest per capita murder rates, with Colima reporting 87.3 homicides per 100,000 residents. Guanajuato leads in absolute numbers with over 2,800 homicides recorded through October 2025, reflecting the intense territorial disputes between criminal organizations vying for control of strategic corridors. States along the Pacific coast, including Sinaloa, Guerrero, and Michoacán, maintain consistently elevated violence levels, while Central Mexican states show increasing homicide rates as criminal organizations expand their territorial ambitions beyond traditional strongholds. The impact of cartel violence on civilian populations extends far beyond direct casualties to encompass psychological trauma, economic disruption, and social fragmentation that affects entire communities. Families living in cartel-controlled territories report constant fear that prevents normal social activities, with children unable to attend school regularly and adults avoiding public spaces during certain hours. The violence creates environments where civilian populations must navigate complex territorial boundaries maintained by different criminal organizations, often without clear markings or warnings about which group controls specific areas. This territorial complexity forces civilians to develop survival strategies that include avoiding certain neighborhoods, limiting travel during specific times, and maintaining neutrality in conflicts they cannot escape. Economic development suffers severe disruption in regions affected by high levels of cartel violence, with businesses facing extortion demands, supply chain interruptions, and reduced consumer activity. Small businesses report paying monthly protection fees that can consume 20 to 30% of their gross revenue, forcing many enterprises to close permanently. Agricultural production declines in areas where farmers cannot safely access their fields or transport products to market. Tourism, a crucial economic sector for many Mexican communities, has collapsed in regions where violence makes travel dangerous for both domestic and international visitors. Population displacement represents one of the most serious humanitarian consequences of cartel violence, with entire communities abandoning their homes to escape territorial disputes between criminal organizations. The Mexican government estimates that over 400,000 people have been internally displaced due to violence since 2006, with approximately 80,000 new displacements occurring in 2025. These displaced populations often lack access to basic services, including healthcare, education, and employment opportunities in their new locations. The displacement particularly affects rural communities where traditional livelihoods become impossible due to territorial control by criminal organizations. The targeting of journalists, politicians, and civil society leaders represents a systematic effort by criminal organizations to eliminate oversight and accountability mechanisms that could challenge their territorial control. Mexico ranks among the most dangerous countries globally for journalists, with 15 media workers killed in 2025 and dozens more receiving death threats that force them to abandon their profession or flee the country. Local politicians face similar threats, with mayors and municipal officials in cartel-controlled territories operating under constant fear of assassination. Civil society organizations report that activists working on human rights issues face systematic intimidation that includes threats against family members. The normalization of violence in certain regions has created communities where extreme brutality becomes part of daily life, fundamentally altering social relationships and community structures. Children growing up in these environments often view violence as a normal part of adult life, affecting their psychological development and future life. Choices. Educational institutions struggle to maintain normal operations when students and teachers face constant security threats. Healthcare systems in affected regions report treating increasing numbers of trauma victims while operating under security conditions that limit their ability to provide comprehensive medical care. Victim protection programs operated by Mexican government agencies have achieved limited success in protecting witnesses and victims who cooperate with law enforcement operations. The Federal Witness Protection Program has relocated fewer than 500 people annually, far below the number who require protection services. Many potential witnesses refuse to cooperate with investigations because they lack confidence in the government's ability to provide effective protection. The scale of violence has fundamentally altered Mexican society by creating parallel governance structures where criminal organizations provide services and maintain order in territories where government authority has collapsed. These criminal governance systems include dispute resolution mechanisms, taxation through extortion, and public safety services that communities accept as alternatives to absent government services. The transformation represents a fundamental challenge to Mexico's constitutional order, creating situations where criminal organizations exercise governmental functions over populations that have no alternative sources of security or services. This evolution from criminal enterprises to quasi-governmental entities raises profound questions about the nature of sovereignty and state authority in the modern era. Geopolitical implications, Mexico's sovereignty challenge. These developments have created geopolitical implications that extend far beyond Mexico's borders, fundamentally challenging traditional concepts of sovereignty and state authority. Criminal organizations in Mexico have evolved beyond traditional organized crime to challenge the fundamental principles of state sovereignty through territorial control that rivals governmental authority. These organizations now exercise de facto governmental functions across vast regions where the Mexican state maintains only nominal presence. The transformation represents a direct challenge to the Westphalian system of nation-states, where recognized governments hold monopolies on legitimate violence and administrative control within defined territories. Criminal organizations have established parallel governance structures that provide services, collect taxes through extortion, and maintain judicial systems that operate independently of constitutional authority. This quasi-governmental control extends across approximately one-third of Mexican territory, creating a situation where non-state actors exercise sovereign powers traditionally reserved for legitimate governments. The territorial control exercised by criminal organizations includes areas where they maintain complete administrative authority over civilian populations, economic activities, and territorial boundaries. In regions of Michoacán, Guerrero, and Sinaloa, criminal organizations operate checkpoints, collect taxes from businesses, and provide security services that replace government functions. These organizations establish their own courts that resolve disputes, impose punishments, and maintain order through systems that civilians recognize as legitimate alternatives to absent government services. The administrative structures include personnel dedicated to taxation, judicial functions, and territorial defense that mirror governmental departments while operating outside constitutional frameworks. Mexico's international relations have suffered significant deterioration as neighboring countries and international partners lose confidence in the government's ability to maintain territorial control and fulfill sovereign obligations. The United States has implemented increasingly aggressive policies that include threats of military intervention, tariff impositions, and designation of criminal organizations as foreign terrorist organizations. These measures reflect growing international recognition that Mexico's sovereignty challenges extend beyond domestic security issues to affect regional stability and international law enforcement cooperation. The diplomatic implications include reduced cooperation in areas ranging from trade to migration, as international partners question Mexico's capacity to fulfill bilateral agreements and international obligations. United States-Mexico security cooperation has become increasingly strained as American officials question Mexico's political will and operational capability to combat criminal organizations that threaten both countries. The bicentennial framework for security cooperation faces implementation challenges as American agencies express frustration with Mexican government restrictions on United States operations within Mexican territory. The security cooperation includes intelligence sharing, joint operations, and equipment provision that requires Mexican government approval for American activities. However, the territorial control exercised by criminal organizations limits the effectiveness of these cooperative efforts by creating areas where neither Mexican nor American law enforcement can operate safely. Criminal organizations manipulate political processes and electoral systems through intimidation, corruption, and direct participation that undermines democratic governance at local and regional levels. Municipal elections in cartel-controlled territories often feature candidates who receive approval from criminal organizations before announcing their candidacies. The electoral manipulation includes assassination of candidates who oppose criminal interests, vote buying in areas where criminal organizations control economic opportunities, and intimidation of election officials who might challenge fraudulent results. These practices create political systems where elected officials serve criminal interests rather than constitutional obligations, further eroding governmental legitimacy. The economic leverage wielded by criminal organizations over local and regional governments derives from their control of economic opportunities, tax collection through extortion, and provision of employment that exceeds legitimate alternatives. Municipal governments in cartel-controlled areas depend on criminal organizations for revenue through informal taxation agreements that supplement inadequate federal funding. These economic relationships create dependency structures where local governments cannot function without criminal organization cooperation. The economic leverage extends to regional development projects where criminal organizations control construction contracts, labor supply, and raw materials that determine project feasibility. Cartel territorial control directly affects Mexico's ability to enforce national laws by creating jurisdictions where constitutional authority cannot operate effectively. Federal agencies attempting to enforce laws in cartel-controlled territories face armed resistance that exceeds their operational capabilities. The enforcement challenges include areas where criminal organizations maintain superior firepower, local population support, and territorial knowledge that prevents government operations. These enforcement limitations create situations where national laws exist on paper but cannot be implemented in practice, effectively creating autonomous zones where criminal organizations determine legal frameworks. The international legal implications of non-state actors controlling territory within recognized national boundaries challenge established principles of international law and sovereignty. The situation creates legal ambiguities regarding Mexico's obligations under international treaties and agreements when criminal organizations prevent government compliance. International law assumes that recognized governments maintain effective control over their territories and can fulfill treaty obligations. The territorial control exercised by criminal organizations creates situations where Mexico cannot meet international obligations regarding drug trafficking, human rights, and territorial security that form the basis of international cooperation agreements. The cartel crisis represents a fundamental challenge to the modern nation-state system by demonstrating how non-state actors can achieve territorial control and governmental functions without international recognition or constitutional legitimacy. The situation challenges basic assumptions about sovereignty, territorial integrity, and governmental authority that form the foundation of international relations. Criminal organizations have achieved quasi-sovereign status through territorial control, administrative capabilities, and economic power that rivals legitimate governments. The transformation represents an evolution in organized crime that transcends traditional criminal activities to encompass governmental functions and territorial authority. These unprecedented developments raise critical questions about Mexico's trajectory and potential outcomes that could emerge from this complex security crisis. Future scenarios, the path forward. Several distinct pathways emerge from analyzing current trends and governmental capabilities, each carrying profound implications for Mexico's future stability. Current trends through the remainder of the decade suggest Mexico will experience continued fragmentation of criminal organizations rather than consolidation into fewer, more manageable groups. The Sinaloa cartel's internal war between Los Chapitos and El Mayo factions creates opportunities for rival organizations to expand territorial control while the fractured cartel struggles with succession disputes. The ACOLD Conflict Watch List 2025 projects that ongoing conflicts among criminal organizations risk expanding into new areas, particularly in states with significant Sinaloa cartel presence, amid the ongoing turf war between Los Mayitos and Los Chapitos. This fragmentation pattern will likely accelerate as other major cartels face similar leadership transitions and territorial pressures from smaller emerging groups. Expert predictions regarding cartel evolution emphasize technological advancement and international expansion as defining characteristics of future criminal organizations. Intelligence analysts anticipate that criminal groups will increasingly adopt artificial intelligence for logistics optimization, blockchain technology for financial transactions, and autonomous systems for drug trafficking operations. The organizational structure will likely shift toward decentralized networks that can operate independently when leadership faces disruption, making traditional kingpin strategies less effective. Future cartels will function more like multinational corporations with specialized divisions for different criminal activities rather than hierarchical organizations dependent on charismatic leaders. State response capabilities face fundamental limitations that prevent decisive victories against criminal organizations operating with quasi-governmental authority. Mexican security forces lack the personnel, equipment, and sustained political support necessary to maintain territorial control across the vast regions where criminal organizations have established dominance. The military and National Guard cannot simultaneously combat multiple criminal organizations while protecting civilian populations and maintaining regular governmental functions. Intelligence capabilities remain insufficient to penetrate criminal organizations that employ sophisticated counter-surveillance and operational security measures exceeding those of many nation-states. Successful resolution of the crisis would require unprecedented resources and political will that exceed current Mexican governmental capabilities. A comprehensive solution would demand sustained deployment of 200,000 security personnel across contested territories for periods exceeding 5 years, accompanied by massive investments in intelligence gathering, communication systems, and territorial administration. The financial requirements would exceed $50 billion annually, representing resources that would require international support and domestic consensus that has proven elusive across multiple presidential administrations. Colombia's experience during the 1990s and 2000s provides relevant examples of successful approaches to combating powerful criminal organizations, though the contexts differ significantly from Mexico's current situation. Plan Colombia involved massive international assistance, primarily from the United States, that funded military operations, alternative development programs, and institutional strengthening efforts over 15 years. The Colombian approach emphasized simultaneously weakening criminal organizations through military pressure while strengthening state institutions and providing economic alternatives in affected regions. However, Colombia's smaller territory and different geographic conditions made comprehensive territorial control more feasible than in Mexico's vast and diverse landscape. The long-term implications for regional stability extend beyond Mexico's borders to affect migration patterns, economic development, and security cooperation throughout North America. Criminal organization territorial control creates ungoverned spaces that generate refugee flows, disrupt trade relationships, and provide bases for international criminal operations. Central American countries report increasing presence of Mexican criminal organizations within their territories, creating security challenges that exceed their law enforcement capabilities. International intervention faces political and practical obstacles that limit its effectiveness while potentially exacerbating the crisis through unintended consequences. The re-elected Donald Trump administration has threatened military intervention, with Republican leaders floating the idea of using military force within Mexico to target drug kingpins and curb fentanyl trafficking. However, unilateral military action would likely fragment criminal organizations further, while damaging bilateral relationships essential for sustained cooperation. International intervention requires Mexican government consent and coordination that becomes difficult when criminal organizations control territories where foreign forces would operate. The scenario of continued stalemate appears most likely given current trends and governmental capabilities. This outcome involves sustained violence levels, territorial control by criminal organizations, and periodic government operations that achieve tactical successes without strategic resolution. The stalemate scenario maintains Mexico's constitutional government while accepting de facto criminal control over significant territories. This outcome preserves international relationships while acknowledging the limitations of current approaches to territorial control and criminal organization elimination. Potential state collapse scenarios involve the expansion of criminal territorial control to include major urban centers and strategic infrastructure that would fundamentally challenge governmental authority. These scenarios become more likely if criminal organizations achieve coordination against government forces or if economic crises reduce state capacity for sustained security operations. The window for effective action narrows as criminal organizations consolidate territorial control and develop institutional capabilities that rival governmental authority. Each year of continued criminal territorial control strengthens their administrative systems, corruption networks, and local population support while weakening government legitimacy and operational capability. The judicial reforms initiated under López Obrador, including popular election of judges, could further exacerbate risks by exposing candidates to criminal influence. The longer criminal organizations maintain territorial control, the more difficult it becomes to dislodge them through conventional law enforcement or military operations. Mexico's future depends on decisions made during the next 5 years regarding resource allocation, international cooperation, and political will for sustained operations against criminal organizations. The current trajectory suggests continued fragmentation and violence rather than resolution, with implications that fundamentally challenge traditional concepts of governance and state authority. The transformation documented throughout this analysis reveals a security crisis that transcends traditional organized crime to encompass fundamental questions about state authority in the modern era. Mexican criminal organizations have evolved from traditional trafficking groups into quasi-state actors that exercise territorial control, collect taxes, and provide governmental services across vast regions where constitutional authority has collapsed. These organizations generate annual revenues exceeding $50 billion while maintaining military capabilities that rival national armies. Their territorial dominance challenges fundamental principles of sovereignty and creates ungoverned spaces that affect regional stability beyond Mexico's borders. The crisis represents a new form of conflict where non-state actors achieve governmental functions without legitimacy, creating durable disorder that resists conventional solutions and